Hello. Welcome to the Casecracker Stories. I am Jason. Those who follow and enjoy this channel are undoubtedly enthusiasts of true crime and horrific events. If you were to let your imagination run wild and conceive the most desperate and sorrowful scenario, what would it look like? If inspiration does not strike you immediately, the real-life case I am presenting today will certainly leave you with much to consider. On the morning of April 6, 2022, at a resort called Sea Gypsy in Mersing, Malaysia, a British man named Adrian Chesters and his son, Nathan Chesters, were at the dock, preparing to head out to sea. Adrian was an employee at the Malaysian branch of a British oil company. He had brought his wife and 2 children to this location. In part, he was drawn by the natural beauty and the coastal scenery surrounding the resort. It was indeed an ideal place for the children to spend their spring break. On the other hand, the site also served as a diving center, where professional instructors provided certification courses. Both Adrian and his 14-year-old son, Nathan, were diving enthusiasts. They intended to use this vacation as an opportunity to obtain their advanced open water diver certifications. For the first few days after arriving at the resort, everything was as they had imagined. Days were filled with sun, sea, and various water activities. Nights were spent by bonfires with dinner on the beach. As for the 2-day diving training, the start was also highly satisfactory. The resort assigned them an instructor, a 35-year-old Norwegian woman named Christine Grodum. She was highly experienced in dive instruction. Her directives were concise and clear. Under her supervision, the first day of training for the father and son went smoothly. They successfully completed all required drills near the shore. Consequently, on the second day of training, April 6th, their training site was moved to the vicinity of a reef called Pulau Tokong Raket. This was a major selling point for the resort's diving center. In the promotional materials, they claimed that the waters surrounding this small rocky island are a pristine territory, yet to undergo commercial development. The clarity of the water, the dense schools of fish, and the vibrant coral reefs made it a diving paradise. A once-in-a-lifetime experience no enthusiast would miss. It was based on these descriptions that the Chester father and son were filled with anticipation for this day of training. After donning the diving equipment provided by the resort at the pier, they boarded a boat and headed out to sea with their instructor, Christine. Accompanying them that day was another student, an 18-year-old French girl named Alexia Molina. At that time, including the instructor, none of them knew that this dive site, heavily promoted by the resort, actually harbored massive safety risks. In terms of scenery alone, Tokong Raket lived up to the hype. The untouched coral ecosystem and the schools of fish were truly beautiful. But to call it a suitable place for diving, or even a place for dive training, was a blatant lie. If one were to simply ask the local fishermen or the personnel from rescue agencies, they would learn that beneath the surface of that seemingly calm sea, several powerful undercurrents were hidden. These currents would pull swimmers or divers toward the seabed or sweep them out to the open ocean. Panic-induced drownings occurred there at regular intervals. However, due to deliberate concealment and cover-ups in the official records, this area maintained a record of 0 accidents and 0 fatalities for years. This became the marketing capital for local businesses that profited from tourism, resorts, and diving operations. And so, on April 6, 2022, 4 divers, completely unaware of these facts, jumped into those waters. Fortunately, their luck held out to some extent. Although they encountered a strong surge of water during the descent, it was not the legendary undercurrent that drags victims to the bottom. Under the protection and guidance of the instructor, the 3 students successfully descended to a depth of 20 meters. They eventually returned safely to the boat. Adrian was feeling a slight sense of fatigue. He ate some bread, which provided some relief. However, his son's condition was beginning to worry him. He noticed 14-year-old Nathan's body was trembling. It was clear the boy had exhausted his physical reserves fighting the current. His face was pale. His eyes were vacant. He appeared to have been severely shaken by the ordeal. He was now struggling to keep his emotions under control. This made Adrian apprehensive about the 2 remaining dives. He was concerned. When he asked if they could end the session for the day, the captain stated that today's schedule was already finalized. Even if they canceled now, they would still be charged for the remaining 2 dives. Hearing the captain's response, Nathan began to reassure his father, saying he was fine. The instructor also stated that the next session would be a drift dive. They wouldn't need to go as deep. It shouldn't be as physically demanding as the previous one, adopting a "since we're already here" mentality. Adrian agreed to re-enter the water. This time, they were taken to a rocky reef known as Tokong Sanggol. According to the captain, the currents in this area were calmer. He claimed it was more suitable for beginners. In reality, the currents in this sector were far more violent and unpredictable than those in the previous waters. Once the 4 of them were in the water, they realized with horror that they were powerless against the undercurrents. After descending only 10 meters, they were nearly swept apart by the surge. The instructor, Christine, was visibly shaken. She quickly signaled to abort the training and led the 3 students back to the surface. At this point, though exhausted and significantly traumatized, they had sustained no physical injuries. All they needed to do was board the boat and head home. Everything that had happened would likely fade after a hot shower. But then, the unexpected happened. The boat that was supposed to be waiting for them at the surface had vanished. The 4 of them scanned the horizon. Finally, several hundred meters out at sea, they spotted a small black dot. It appeared to be their boat. It was likely that the underwater currents had pushed them far from their original entry point. In a situation like this, a diver would typically use their whistle to alert the captain to their current position so the vessel could return to pick them up. But on that day, the equipment provided to the 3 students by the dive center did not include whistles. Only the instructor, Christine, had one on her person. And even this single lifeline was defective. It wouldn't make a sound. Stunned, the group had no choice but to scream toward the boat at the top of their lungs. However, their voices couldn't carry far before being drowned out by the sea wind. It was useless. More desperate still, the small boat, after a short while, seemed to turn in the opposite direction. It soon vanished from sight. The 4 were completely abandoned in the open ocean. Driven by the current, they were being drifted further and further away from the coast. The instructor pulled out a bright orange surface marker buoy and used a line to secure them all around it, trying to prevent the current from scattering the group. This was the last piece of survival gear she had. From then on, their only hope was being spotted by search and rescue. Just like that, they drifted on the surface for over an hour. The midday sun beat down relentlessly. The glare off the water was blinding. Dizziness and exhaustion quickly set in. Due to the prolonged exposure, the skin on their faces and necks began to turn a deep, dark red. At this point, Christine stated that waiting around was not an option. She was going to go for help. Her decision left the other three in a state of shock. After all, in an environment like this, the instructor was the only one with experience, their only person to lean on. Once she left, the remaining three survivors were left behind. Their survival was now a matter of chance. At the same time, they were fully aware of the stakes. They knew the reality of their situation. Staying idle and waiting for rescue would be fatal. The conditions were only going to deteriorate. They could only watch helplessly. Christine untied the line connected to the buoy. She began swimming in the direction where the boat had vanished. They watched as their instructor drifted further away. Eventually, she disappeared entirely into the rolling swells. 46-year-old Adrian Chesters, 14-year-old Nathan Chesters, and 18-year-old Alexia Molina, a French national. They were left staring into the void of the open sea, facing an outcome that was completely unknown. On their bodies, they were each wearing a buoyancy control device, referred to as a BCD. It functioned similarly to a life jacket. This meant that in the immediate short term, drowning was not the primary concern. The real threat was different. It came from the prolonged deprivation of food and water, the constant physical attrition on their systems. Above them, the scorching sun began burning their skin, combined with the high salinity of the seawater, which relentlessly irritated their skin and any minor abrasions. The physiological stress was mounting minute by minute. Initially, the three of them attempted to stay connected. They talked and tried to offer words of encouragement, desperately trying to maintain a sense of optimism. But it didn't last. They soon fell into a heavy silence, simply avoiding inhaling water and maintaining their buoyancy on the surface was consuming the bulk of their remaining energy. Time passed. They faced their first night on the open water. By this point, Adrian's primary concern was the condition of his son. At only 14, Nathan was still just a boy. His adolescent body was fragile. It had limited energy reserves to draw upon. In the cooling waters of the night, he was losing body heat significantly faster than the adults. During the afternoon hours, he had still been capable of swimming normally. He was still able to communicate with his father. But as night fell, his complexion began to turn pale. Eventually, he lacked the strength to speak. He could only weakly cling to his father's arm, pressing his body as close as possible, attempting to preserve any remaining body heat. As a father, Adrian, all he could do at that moment was offer constant reassurance, while repeatedly praying in his mind, hoping the rescue teams would find them before everything reached the point of no return. Find them. So at this time, the dive boat that had lost them, and the people back at the resort, what were they doing? According to the subsequent investigation, the captain who had transported them to the dive site that day had only ever operated cargo ships. He had been hired by the resort just 2 weeks prior to begin ferrying divers. He completely lacked the knowledge of how to keep divers within his line of sight, or how to track divers who might have drifted from the surfacing point based on the direction of the ocean currents. These essential skills were entirely absent. Therefore, on that day, after following the surface bubbles for a short distance, he completely lost track of the 4 divers. At a loss, he waited idle for over 20 minutes, then reported the situation to the resort via radio, before hastily piloting the boat back. When the news reached the resort, it caused immediate shock and panic. Adrian's wife and daughter broke down in tears. Upon receiving the report, police immediately launched a rescue operation. The local military also dispatched a vessel, heading toward the Tokong Sangol waters to conduct a search. But due to the currents, the 4 divers were already over 10 kilometers away from their initial entry point. The search teams failed to locate them by nightfall and were forced to withdraw. For the 3 students, the nightmare was only beginning. After dark, heavy swells surged across the sea, repeatedly dragging them beneath the surface. They were forced to swim back to the surface repeatedly, desperate for air. Each effort further depleted their physical stamina. In the struggle, They were forced to swallow a significant amount of high-salinity seawater. This only accelerated the onset of severe dehydration. When the wind and waves finally subsided slightly, Adrian suddenly felt something. His son's hand was hitting him repeatedly. Upon closer inspection, he realized the terrifying truth. Nathan's body was convulsing in violent, uncontrollable tremors. The boy was in a critical state. His physical strength was completely spent. His body was undergoing its final, involuntary struggle for survival. It was a sight that devastated Adrian. But other than holding his son tightly in his arms and whispering words of encouragement into his ear, he was utterly powerless. They managed to survive the first night in this manner. As the sun rose, the water temperature began to climb slightly. Adrian, who had been suffering from the early stages of hypothermia, and the French national, Alexia, regained a fraction of their strength. Nathan, however, remained in a semi-comatose state, unable to move. His survival depended entirely on his father's constant support. Adrian held him up, ensuring his head stayed above the surface. Meanwhile, at a significant distance from their position, having endured the same night of relentless waves, a severely weakened diving instructor, Christine, was spotted by a search team. She was pulled from the water based on the coordinates she provided. Rescuers were still unable to locate the 3 missing students. The reason was clear. Strong maritime currents had already swept them out of Malaysian territorial waters. They had drifted into Indonesian jurisdiction. In these specific waters, numerous sharks were present. They began to circle the survivors, positioning themselves as if waiting for an inevitable kill. Swarms of jellyfish drifted through periodically. Their venomous tentacles struck, leaving horrific, inflamed welts across the bodies of the 3 victims. Exhausted and drained of all energy, they no longer had the strength to push the jellyfish away or the mobility to swim clear of them. They were forced to endure the trauma in silence. Only Adrian, the eldest, maintained a fragile grip on consciousness. He checked his son's vital signs periodically and called out to the French girl to keep her focused. But Alexia had also slipped into a semi-comatose state. Only occasionally, she would suddenly snap awake. Her eyes would widen, scanning the surroundings. She seemed unable to distinguish between the nightmare and reality. Watching this unfold, Adrian realized that they likely wouldn't survive this ordeal. Meanwhile, back at the resort, a chaotic scene was playing out. The owner clearly knew he was liable for this disaster. He began attempting to cut ties with the Chester's family. Using the excuse of making room for new tourists, he forced Adrian's wife and daughter to pack up and leave. Furthermore, he demanded that they pay the full cost of the search and rescue vessel in advance. Amidst this turmoil, the sun set once again. The search party returned, empty-handed once more. Out at sea, Adrian officially faced the most desperate night of his life. At midnight, he felt his son's body go completely limp in his arms. There was no response to his shaking or his calls. Adrian refused to accept it. He reached out and pried open Nathan's eyelids. The boy's dull, lifeless eyes delivered the most brutal truth to his father. That truth was, his son's life had been completely extinguished. Adrian's grief and agony were unimaginable. He screamed and wept, relentlessly shaking Nathan's body. But the only response was the constant howling of the sea wind and the painful moans of the semi-conscious French girl crying out from her nightmare. Adrian screamed until his throat was hoarse, and his tears had completely run dry. Finally, all he could do was use his diving rope to lash his son's body to his own. His physical strength had reached its limit. He closed his eyes and drifted into unconsciousness. He expected this to be his final rest, joining his son in death. But when the sun rose again, Adrian woke up once more. To his devastating despair, his son was no longer in his arms. while he was unconscious, the waves had unraveled the knots in the rope. They took Nathan's remains. Adrian scanned the surrounding area frantically, but there was no sign of his son anywhere. While scanning the horizon, he spotted something. Adrian saw a small black dot in the distance. It appeared to be a dark speck on the water. Initially, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, or perhaps it was a hallucination brought on by the brink of death. But after confirming several times, the image remained. That black dot stayed in the same position, fixed. This sparked a renewed hope for survival within him. He immediately nudged Alexia, who was beside him. At this point, the French girl could only manage a faint groan. It was the only proof she was still alive. She was completely incapable of swimming on her own. Adrian forced himself to keep going with his last breath. He dragged the girl toward the black dot. Every kick was accompanied by agonizing pain throughout his body. Yet, he did not dare to stop for a single second. He persisted like this for several hours. Finally, they reached the object. It was a floating fish cage set up by Indonesian fishermen. Upon reaching it, the situation remained dire. Adrian was too exhausted to climb up. He could only reach out and repeatedly slap the side of the structure. Fortunately, there were fishermen on duty that day. After hearing the commotion, they acted. Both he and the girl were pulled up. Their 3-day nightmare at sea had finally come to an end. The fishermen contacted rescue services by phone. A few hours later, Adrian and Alexia were found. They were airlifted by helicopter to a local hospital. During this process, a struggle ensued. Adrian tried several times to ask them to recover his son's body, but what came out of his mouth was unintelligible. He uttered only broken fragments, illogical words that made no sense. The reality was severe dehydration. Combined with the scorching sun, the damage was internal. His brain had sustained significant trauma. It had severely impaired his ability to speak. It took several days for his speech to slowly return. Nathan's remains were never recovered. Regarding this diving incident, the investigation is clear. Looking at the root cause, the facts are damning. The resort is absolutely liable. First, they used high-risk waters as a marketing gimmick to attract tourists. They promoted a dangerous area as a selling point. The boat transporting the divers was understaffed. The captain was completely inexperienced. During the subsequent investigation, it was also detected that there were banned substances in his blood. It could be said that the vetting process for employees was riddled with loopholes. Regarding the gear issued to the diving students, forget advanced GPS tracking. Even the most basic distress whistles were missing. It was a case of flagrant disregard for human life. Yet, in the aftermath, the resort completely denied any responsibility. There was no significant accountability mechanism from the Malaysian authorities. Ultimately, against the resort and that captain, fines of only a few $100s each were issued, and the case was closed. The legal action initiated by the Chester's family continues to this day. That concludes today's program. Once again, thank you very much for your support and encouragement. We will see you in the next video.